Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the Minister of Transportation of Colombia, Ángela María Orozco, and Andrea Bernal, presenter and director of RCN NTN 24.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Bernal. I'm a journalist of NRC and television, and this is a great opportunity being able to share time with our transportation ministry. It's a great opportunity to sit down with you and share this experience. So we're talking about transporting solutions and keeping economies moving. And in that regard, we have a whole bunch of options in order to this because we only have 20 minutes, but I'm sure that you can mention all your plans and everything that the current government is doing in terms of policies and transportation policies from the government. Maybe when we talk about competitiveness and we can talk about the four generation roads in Colombia. So this is one of the most ambitious projects in regards to our infrastructure in this country. So what has happened with this infrastructure? What's the current state and which are those perspectives for the future? So this was a great focus, and we're betting on this. It's about connecting the country from north to the south end, because that's the whole point of this fourth generation roads. We encountered 29 very big projects. We had public-private alliances. Most of them were public, but 9 of them were private. These were projects that were financed just with the tolls, and these projects and these structures were agreements that were written from 2014 to 2016. And what we discovered excellent projects from those 29. 6 were running pretty well, but the rest, specifically, we're talking about 21 of them, were absolutely stuck with only 2% progress for multiple reasons, because Colombia has a difficult geography, and this involves not just a good structure, but its execution implies a lot of challenges that impact a lot of regional and state agencies. And by analyzing this current state of paralysis of very important projects that were also impacting resources for more than 90,000 million pesos. So the most important infrastructure. So we thought about this new phase with all the different stakeholders in the sector. So we wanted to come up with a diagnosis in regards to execution promises, about identifying all the common problems in all these projects, and at the same time proposing common solutions for all these projects. So that document was written in between October and November of last year. It took us about 2 months to do it. It's a public document, and it's a roadmap that it's allowing us to activate these projects. And this is a public document because it's important to consider this concept of to common problems should have common solutions. So we started to working cross-sectionally along with the president, with this cross-sectional committee that involves all the ministries, not just the transportation ministry, because as you know, this is up, or we're talking about a lot of different agencies. And once we started working with this document, we started working contract by contract. And today we can say that we have 60% of these projects running. So we have 21 projects running right now. The numbers in growth are, you can see them already. In fact, the first semesters of 2018, this sector showed a 5% drop, and we've seen an important growth this year, and we're close to coming up with the first trimester numbers. But we've been growing nevertheless. I believe that we achieved the objective which is that message of trust, how we can articulate the state as a whole, sitting with the environmental ministry, with the different agencies, and making those administrative decisions that we needed to make. We were not able to do that. This was just a consequence of that paralysis, because we are aware of all those problems. And there's a more important challenge that you're mentioning, which is the local challenge. But when we compare ourselves, which is inevitable when we compare ourselves with other nations in Latin America. A few years ago, some people even said that Ecuador was a leader in regards to infrastructure, that Peru was sharing the same situation, and this fourth generation issue was a big problem in Colombia. Now we have a new government, so which is that diagnosis in regards of this policies and infrastructure in Colombia and the roads. Okay, so we compare ourselves with the international global report and the infrastructure global report. And last year's report, we are located number 60. We're ranked at number 60. Is that enough? No, we have improved, but this is not enough. You know that Colombia, it's a country from a historical perspective. We know that its geographical conditions are tough. Its mountain ranges makes life or complicates this execution. So, for example, the mid mountain range in Colombia for a long time. A lot of people doubted if we could go, if we could cross this mountain ranges with a tunnel. A lot of people doubted this possibilities, but I believe that there's room for improvement, but we have improved at the same time. So I believe that this is important. We need to consider that. We need to consider these different projects that are connecting the country, not just to improve competitiveness, but also to improve our quality of life. Something else that it's also a challenge, not just for you, but for our country and for our region, when we talk about the sustainable development objectives, is in order to live in a sustainable environment. So mobility is an important factor. So we need to focus on efficient transportation, sustainable transportation, and competitive transportation. So I believe that's what the user perceives, and that's what the user wonders about it, how this public transportation is actually working, or it's there to increase that quality of life. What do we need in order to improve this sustainable mobility? We're thinking about reducing CO2 emissions, how we can change those mobility patterns. In this case, using bicycles. Like for example, in Brazil, we've seen that focus from the central perspective, from the national perspective. Are you focusing on this sustainable mobility, and what cities could serve as an example in that order of ideas? The first thing that I would like to mention is that this in this new government, from scratch, we started to work with all the massive transportation systems around the country in order to come up with a diagnosis, in order to relaunch these systems. We all know all the problems about designing all these systems in this self-sustainable model. As you know, there's massive transportation around the world. They need other financing methods that different than their own fees. So we need to find grants from these territorial agencies, etc. So we designed the whole scheme initially only with financing this with their own fees. So everyone knows about this. 4 years ago, we're not talking about self-sustainable anymore. Now we're talking about sustainable concepts at the same time that we're looking for this financing sources. So this new sustainable development plan is creating a new chapter, an articulated chapter, that it's allowing us to relaunch these policies in regards to these transportation systems, not just involving the possibility for the state to finance 70% of its public transportation systems, not just financing infrastructure, but financing vehicles, as long as they have low CO2 emissions. But we're thinking about new elements for new financing sources available for City Hall in order to create in order to establish these fees so that we can have a more balanced operation, and for the public and the user can see this as their own right, as a right to improve their quality of life, and at the same time contributing with diminishing the CO2 emissions. This is part of the current debate, and normally in this financing law, we were able to exclude the VAT charge, not just for heavy duty vehicles, but we're talking about for the whole transportation system collectively and individually speaking, where with as long as these new vehicles are not emitting a lot of CO2, they're gonna receive this tax benefit. We basically designed this comprehensive package where we're promoting sustainable mobility. We're promoting that. Obviously, the fact that they have low CO2 emissions, and at the same time, we're providing tools. We're being establishing this among this development plan faculties for mayors to adopt that mechanism that can motivate this sustainable mobility, and maybe they can charge more taxes for some agents. It's an arsenal of tools that are focusing on this approach. And what I said before, the most important concept is to take this public transportation to the community and include the normal users, including illegality in a lot of regions in the country. Maybe one thing happens in Bogota and something else, the suburbs, where people are not even using banks, so forcing people to pay transportation with a card, with a credit card, if they are not bank users, that means isolating people from the transportation system. We're flexibilizing that concept because what we need to achieve that we need to make sure that that vehicle stays at home and make sure that the last section of those transportation systems or strategic points in different regions is going to be removed by a bicycle or by pedestrian mobility. All of that needs to be included within this mobility plan of the nation.
And when we're talking about this mobility plan, we need to have in mind, like how, for example, in Bogota, how is it possible that Bogota doesn't have a subway system? So, is there any kind of commitment to have or to reinforce this subway idea in Bogota? Yes, it is a fact. And actually, the Duke's president commitment has been that one precisely. Because not only we haven't signed only the agreements, but we have also opened some of the trunkle, some of the main roads in order to fulfill this commitment. So we can actually open, and we are going to have October as our deadline to implement this system, because not only as a nation that we're going to fund 70%, but also all of the different systems that are going to complement this main subway system. The idea is to complement the whole system so we can implement the subway. Bogota has to have this subway because it is fundamental. It is a key aspect of the city, and of course, it has to be the more sustainable possible due to its nature. And how would it change the nature of transportation in Bogota? Like immediately after implementing this, what would be the changes? What would be the before and after? Well, what happens is that here it is very complex to analyze this because it takes some years. And to fulfill these goals or these commitments that we have is actually to implement or to improve our mobility. Here we're going to have different lines. And of course, this first line is going to be complemented together with the different measures that we have already mentioned. And the idea is to actually promote people not using their private vehicles within the city. And the idea is to control the mobility and the legality of these systems, and to see and to foresee whatever is happening in the city. So obviously we understand that it takes 2 years, a couple of years to have this building process, and this is something that we need to face, and it of course happens in every single country where we have this implementation. And in the last 7 minutes that we have, I'd like to talk about the airports, because it is very important to cover this topic, especially with the Dorado airport, because among the airports in Latin America, it is one of the first ones. However, in our countries, we have this reality that it is focused most of the times in the capital cities. How are the flights coming in or coming out of the airport? What are the frequencies and the central part of it? So what has happened in terms of development? Well, I think that Bogota, of course, it is a breakthrough. And I think most of you have come to Bogota many of the times whenever you're doing any kind of connection flight. But yes, it is important, and we have done many things, not only because we have done some improvement initiatives, but also because we have also worked on the investment with those airports that are part of the Arisville area. And it is very important because it is projected to 2030, because for the first time this national development plan is focused on the airports. So there is a specific area talking about the airports because we are interested in very investments on this area that we're going to have in mind, not only in the extension of this airport, but also in some other airports that have to do with Cali, Buenaventura, and Ibagué, and some other cities around the country, especially from the west part of the country. And these go together with initiative projects or initiatives, private initiatives, that are helping us from the Providence region, but also they're helping us with the Cartagena. And we are going to have a new airport that is going to be between Cartagena and Barranquilla. So all of these are initiatives that are together with the strategic plan from this government. And what we have seen, if we check what has happened in this sector, we can see that there has been many changes from what has used to happen in the past to whatever is happening now. So if we have, let's say, 12 million flights, now we have 38 million flights. So we can see that the progressions and the projections, what they say is that by 2030 we're going to have 1,000 domestic flights, in which Dorado is going to be, of course, one of the key points, but also the challenge is to connect the different regions across the country. And there are some regions that are the social airports where the only communication access is, in some cases, the airport. So this is not only a part of the fostering plans that we have, but it's part of one of the challenges as a government in which we want to generate or build this trust between the private and public sector. And the idea is basically to reactivate and to recuperate or to come back with this trust that we need to build with our people, and we need to have a sustainable funding because this is going to help the different regions across the country. And we need to communicate these projects in a better way because we need a lot of support from the different regions so we don't fail within these initiatives, which is what we have faced before. Let's say that we are like 3 years away to have this office to be over. So, but if you could mention one of the star projects, one of the initiatives that you can mention from this presidency, what do you say? Well, I think that one central message is to say that we are going to recuperate, you are going to recover the trainways from the north part of the country, especially for the carbon area, for the coal area. But we are going to recover all of this transport area. And likewise, we are going to work on the navigability of the river, the Magdalena River in Colombia, which is the PP that is going to go from Barranca and the channel from Barranca in order to improve this mobility on this sector. So the really innovative thing is that we are going to move from 400,000 kilometers and we're going to move to 1,700 kilometers of coverage. And we are going to recover the trust on the river that, as we were talking about sustainability, this is one of the most important roads, let's say, in order to improve the mobility. And we are going to make it in a very sustainable and environmental way. So what I really think that it's innovative is that we are focusing on having this sector as a sector that is not only the infrastructure, not only has to do with infrastructure, but also it has to work together with the infrastructure and the connectivity and the mobility around the country. And this helps us to have, and this involves to use the big data and to have the specific policies in order to put forward our policies regarding the transportation and the mobility, because as I have said, all of these 4G routes are going to help the country, because as I have said, it was not only to have these plans, but also to execute them. So this is, I think, the moment, and I think that today, in 6 months, we actually have done what we were trying to do, and by August the 7th, we're going to have the results that we initially planned, and this is one big indicator for you as investors to actually support us, because that was our challenge. Yes, of course, that was a challenge at the beginning, but actually we think we are fulfilling our objectives, and that's actually our main goal, to make all of these plans, to make them real. And that's one of the key messages that we want to communicate, and to understand the state as a whole, because the state is going to work together with the execution of these projects, and obviously working together with the communities, which is a key element to make these projects to be real. Just in 1 minute, what has been the most difficult thing about being the Minister of Mobility and Transportation? What has it been the hardest thing to deal with? Let's say 58 seconds. Actually, ask me what is not. What hasn't it been? Well, I think the hardest thing or the toughest thing has been having one sector that was coming from a credibility crisis, because all of these crises with Odebrecht created a huge lack of trust. And our biggest challenge was to recover this trust, obviously from the investors, from the banking, from the private banking, because of all of the funding is coming from all of this funding or all of this financing is coming from this sector, but also coming from our citizens. So having some people that was having people that was opposed to this mobility, it was of course a big failure for us because there was no win-win for anybody. So if the communities weren't supporting this project, these projects, even though we would have all of the resources or everything, it would be impossible for us to execute them because they didn't want anything to be done there. So I think that has been the toughest thing for us. Actually, that was very punctual. Thank you very much. 000. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for your insight. This helps us to understand what's happening in this ministry.